So, good evening to all of the people in the audience. So Thomas will be, Supramar was a hydrofoil design company in Switzerland, founded in 1952. The founders were engineers who have already worked on hydrofoil boats in Germany during and before the Second World War. Their leader was Baron Hans von Schertl, and incidentally, von Schertl also became the first president of the International Hydrofoil Society just over 50 years ago. In May 1953, the world's first passenger hydrofoil, Freccia d'Oro, was put into operation on Lake Maggiore, and Thomas, you can correct the spelling later. This led to the design of larger hydrofoils such as the PT20 and the PT50, and then Supramar became a market leader by this stage in the world of hydrofoils in the Western Hemisphere and Asia for about 25 years. But as Thomas will say, they never built hydrofoils themselves. So Thomas has prepared a mini documentary, and we'll show just a short portion of that. The documentary is available on Thomas's own website as well as the Hydrofoil channel of the IHS. Now, just a quick note on Thomas himself. He's a director, video editor and cameraman at a local television station in central Switzerland. But alongside his employment, he's run his own business, Wuhrmann Enterprises, since 1992. And with that company, he specialises in film and video digitisation, as well as producing documentaries. The last documentary was Fliegende Schiffe, which means flying ships in English, a documentary about Supramar AG, which is now available through Thomas on DVD. Thomas has collected all kinds of hydrofoil material since the late 1980s, and he's now the owner of the archive and the archivist of the official Supramar archive, which was given to him by Harry Trevisani and Volker Jost, the last board members and owners of Supramar in 2017. Thomas's father was the manager and owner of Wasser Shipyard, the company that built the first commercial hydrofoil in the world. Thomas has been a member of the International Hydrofoil Society since the mid-1990s. So Thomas, welcome. Just got a little...
I'm a documentary filmmaker, among other things. And that means I'm a storyteller. Today, I want to tell you something about Supramar. Who or what is Supramar? Here's a very brief overview. In the 1920s, a young engineer named Hans von Schertl began building hydrofoil boats in Wiesbaden, Germany. He built various prototypes. Not all of them worked. In the 1930s, von Schertl met the well-known shipbuilder Gotthard Sachsenberg, and together they began to build larger hydrofoil boats. The first was this one, the so-called Kobo, the Konsortialboot. The German Navy quickly became interested in the technology, and soon the first types were built for a possible use in World War II. The most famous boat was the VS-8. It was designed to transport tanks for the German army from Italy to Africa. It was never really used. After the war, von Schertl and some of his engineers, as Karl Güller and Eugen Chaté, went to Switzerland and founded Supramar here in 1952. Here in Switzerland, in Sternstadt to be precise, the first commercial hydrofoil was built. This resulted in other types of ships, such as the PT20 and the PT50. The hydrofoil boats were exported all over the world, and Supramar became the market leader for hydrofoils for the next 25 years, at least outside of the Soviet Union. And now...
So Thomas, should we let the video run a little while longer, or should we hand over to questions and answers? Because I suspect with lesser people in the audience, there won't be such a diversity of questions.
Well, we start the question and answer because the next part of the video is about the first location of the offices that will not be so interesting, I think. Well, it is interesting, but not so interesting. I think we started the question and answer, and then we will see. I think there is enough to talk. At least you yourself, you will have lots of questions.
Sure.
So I think just do it.
So look, I'll start with handing over to anyone in the audience. So I can see, well, Gunther is here, Ray, Maurice and Ranjan. Galen, I've just noticed you've joined us as well. You're all welcome to ask any questions if you've already watched the full documentary or from what you've just seen a moment ago about the Supramar company. All right, I might make a start. It's one that we sort of discussed earlier, Thomas. I guess I'm sort of wondering when, you know, Supramar, as you say in your documentary, never actually built hydrofoils themselves. They always licensed the construction to other shipyards. So Hitachi, Rodriguez mainly, Western Moen, and a few smaller ones, and Thornycroft, I think, was one of them. But do you think they ever realised, von Schertl and his colleagues, that really they might have to get into the hydrofoil building business themselves rather than be reliant on licensed building, because that obviously fell away over the years?
Yes, well, it's always just a kind of speculation what they were thinking back then. But in fact, they had planned to have some own shipyards. In the mid-70s, they founded Supramar Pacific Shipbuilding in Hong Kong. Well, it was their own shipyard. I mean, the most of the shipyard was paid by Far East Hydrofoils and Stanley Ho, which is one of the richest Chinese people. I've seen he's still alive, far over 90 now. And I mean, they invested there, but it was in fact sort of own shipyard. And they planned to have a shipyard mainly financed by Arabians in Singapore. They had already a groundbreaking there, but this was kind of stopped. I don't know exactly why it stopped, but it did so. So I think they knew that it would be a problem in the future that if they can build their own and make a marketing on their own ships. So they're always on the mercy of the licensees, just to bring the boats to the market. And the 70s seems that that's been a hard decade with the energy crisis to sell hydrofoils anyway. And I think they knew that they need to change something.
Yep.
If this answers your question.
Yep. I'll keep on going for the meantime, but others are welcome to chip in. So Stanley Ho, if I understood it right, that was Far East Hydrofoil Company, and I've sort of read some literature in more recent times. Of course, and in fact, I think you mentioned to me just a few days ago that Far East Hydrofoil transitioned fairly rapidly to Boeing jet foils, and I guess later Kawasaki jet foils. So for that company at least, they went in the direction of fully submerged hydrofoils with, I guess, an even smoother ride. And so that would have been one less customer for Supramar boats, and also maybe that connection with the principals of the yard in Singapore were lost as well. So do you have any thoughts about, you know, how that all transpired?
Well, what I can say about this, I should say, deals there. I mean, the Hong Kong shipyard, called Supramar Pacific. Maybe you read this on old brochures, Supramar Pacific shipbuilding. they actually only built one single hydrofoil, that's all. This was a PT75. And in Singapore, at the same time, the CEO of the Supramar, Hussein Ajadi, was there getting into the banking business. He founded the bank later, not in Singapore, but in Malaysia, which is still one of the largest banks there. And maybe it just lost interest because of the sinking amount of salt hydrofoils, and this was not the big business he was thinking it would be when he invested, and maybe it's just a little bit lost of interest, and not only the market or difficulties of not building own boats, or however. I know there had been Arabian, I just call it overall Arabian investors in the Singapore shipyard, and maybe it was more interesting for him to have these investors in the bank instead of in the Supramar shipyard. But as I said before, this is just speculating, because I cannot ask him myself, and so yeah, but I think that's a possible reason.
All right, thank you, Thomas. Any of our audience members, Gary, do you have a question you want to ask of Thomas while there's a chance? No pressure, but you're still muted, remember, Gary, so just hit the unmute button in the bottom corner. Yep.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep. Good.
Yep.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thomas, we've corresponded, and now I feel like I know you quite well, seeing you on the screen, and really was a wonderful documentary. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. You're a natural. Okay, so I hope that finds a broader audience somewhere. Look, just something, I don't know if it's so much as a question or a statement, but so it's sort of ironic that the shipbuilder Rodriguez, who basically they were the ones brave enough to start building these Supramar designs, and is it fair to say that their decision to say we don't want to pay license fees anymore was sort of the beginning of the end of Supramar?
Yeah, that's a fact. So it's not explained in the detail in this short documentary. I can do that now as detailed as possible. It's always a little bit difficult to tell it in English. It's already difficult in German. The fact is that when Supramar and Rodriguez made their license agreement in the mid or early 50s, it sounds unusual, but maybe it was common back then. They didn't give licenses on the specific boats. They gave licenses to the patents of the Supramar. So this means the classic surface-piercing foil system, which is called the Schertl-Sachsenberg foil system. They mainly invented it, and later Rodriguez found out that these patents had been older than from the 50s. In fact, the foil system was already invented in the late 30s, when von Schertl and Sachsenberg built these German Navy hydrofoils. And with the end of the war, the Allied government in Germany gave free all these patents to anyone who wanted to use them. And maybe Supramar didn't realize that, otherwise they would have made new patents in Switzerland or whatever. And so Rodriguez found out these patents they are paying for are not, how should I say, valid anymore, so why should he pay? And then well, there was still the design of the boats, and Supramar and Rodriguez went to an institution. I don't know how it's said in English. It's called the Schiedsgericht, which means it's not the court. It's below that. Okay. And there was an agreement made in this license contract how this should work. The location for that was in Paris, so Rodriguez in Messina, Supramar in Lucerne, and they both go to Paris. And the head, the chairman of this gremium, had to be accepted by both of them. So the one had chosen the person, the other said, "No, I want another one." It needed years, really years, until they could even start all this. And at that time, Supramars run out of money. And at the end, I must confess, I don't know if they ever had a really legal end of that, or had they just stopped it. But anyway, if you look at this, well, Rodriguez was not wrong. In fact, they had paid for patents. They are not valid anymore. On the other hand, Rodriguez would never have built hydrofoils without the concepts of Supramar, and maybe they even had the idea of building hydrofoils. And on the other hand, Supramar boats were designed in Lucerne, but there was a lot from Rodriguez to improve them. So the boats were not planned in every single small detail. They had to do a lot to this. So maybe it was fair that they wouldn't have to pay as much as before, but of course it was not fair to pay nothing.
Yes.
And maybe it was not fair to bring their own hydrofoils, which are, in fact, they are directly based on the Supramar hydrofoils.
Yes.
If you look at the RHS 140 and 160, they don't look like Supramar boats because they are designed 20 years later. But if you have a look on the PT20 and the RHS 70, you see this is the same hydrofoil. Just the RHS 70 has a little bit the sharper edges, but otherwise
cosmetic differences.
Yeah, but it's in fact the same hydrofoil, the same capacity.
Yes.
Just the same engine, the same dimensions. It is
absolutely,
in fact the same hydrofoil.
Yes.
So maybe, as we say in German or in Switzerland, maybe Rodriguez just had the longer breath to survive, and Supramar had that not because they run out of money.
There's the term we use, that they had deeper pockets.
Okay, yeah.
More money.
Yeah.
More money.
Yeah.
Go on. Okay. Very interesting. Very sad, but it's.
Yeah, it's and it's the fun part of, not really fun, but I met just writing in the internet, but I met I think he's the grandson of Carlos Rodriguez, a guy called Leopoldo Rodriguez. He's
I know of him. I've had an email or two with him. Yes.
Yeah, and I wrote some different times with him, and if you ask him, or he, of course, hydrofoils are very familiar to him. He's grown up with hydrofoils, but he never knew that the hydrofoil wasn't an invention of Rodriguez.
No.
He was sure that Rodriguez almost invented the hydrofoil, and he never heard about Supramar.
Okay.
So we are maybe have not so many questions. I can tell some episodes. First, before, well, we have this small documentary, and you may know we have my team and I have done an 80-minute documentary 3 years ago. And long before, when I joined the International Hydrofoil at that time, Hydrofoil Society at that time, first idea was to make a book about. And then I contacted Rodriguez back then. I wrote a letter. It was at the time before everyone had email, especially myself. And it's maybe interesting to know that I never got an answer of the letter when I asked Rodriguez about Supramar. Maybe that speaks a little bit for itself.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you. That's you probably covered it. That's just part of history now.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it looks like Rodriguez might not be around too much longer, or into marine now.
Yeah.
Very little hydrofoil production, which is pretty sad.
Yeah, maybe this time in the 90s when I started all this, a lot of people told me hydrofoils will be gone in the 90s, and they didn't. Still here, and maybe this time it's really close to the end of the hydrofoil. But on the other hand, I mean, the Russians, just say the Russians or the former countries in the former Soviet Union, I don't know actually where they are sitting, but they're now building new hydrofoils. So maybe Rodriguez one day came back to that. Well, Supramar will never design boats again, but I mean, for all of us, it's just nice to, if there are still hydrofoils, whoever they makes.
Well, the DNA, the Supramar DNA would carry through, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
The DNA would carry through. It still exists.
Yeah.
In the surface piece and hydrofoils. Yeah,
and this is an important part for myself, deep in my heart, to tell the people that Supramar is the original commercial hydrofoil. Is a Supramar hydrofoil, and everything else came later. And to tell these stories to younger people, and to keep the legacy of Supramar alive. That's one of the reasons why we have made this 80-minute documentary with all these interviews. And of course, on the other hand, I just love hydrofoils. Since my childhood, that's the other reason. But of course, if you look today, I have met a lot of young people who are foiling, as it is called now, foiling with sailing boats or kite boards, and they actually don't know about any of these histories. They maybe don't even know about commercial hydrofoils. They just think they now have invented something completely new. And if I tell them, it was invented more than 100 years ago, and it was on the top of its development 50 years ago, they look, is this old guy, as I think I am, is this old guy crazy? But yes, it's brings interesting discussions, tell them such stories.
Thank you.
All right. So anyone else in the audience have any questions they'd like to pose to Thomas? Gunther, please.
I just wanted to ask Thomas if he knew the professor, I think, Schuster from the VWS in Berlin.
No.
You did never meet him. Because he was involved in the Sachsenburg Navy development, which the Russians conquered, and that actually started their own hydrofoil development in Russia, you know.
Yeah, also, of course, I hear this name, but I never. I must say, maybe I'm too. Growing older now, but I'm maybe too young. I had when I was a schoolboy. I had maybe Mr. Schuster was never here, but I had the chance when I was at the time I went to school to meet Eugen Chate, which was one of the earliest engineers, and von Schertl had died one before when the year before I started to interest in hydrofoils. And unfortunately there was Herman de Witt. I have met him once, but this was maybe I was too young then to ask people about their history. So when you are just 15 years old and fascinated in hydrofoils, you like to see photographs, films, plans, but you don't ask about history. No. And if I look back, it would have been interesting to talk with these people really about history and the facts that are not written anymore or anywhere. So there are a lot of stories. In one book is that story, and in the other book is a different story. And so it would be nice to go back in time and meet some people and hear what they can tell us today.
You know, I remember there were lots of model tests run in the dying tank in Berlin, you know. And yeah. Professor Schuster, he was naturally a specialist. He came from the eastern side to West Berlin, did flee the other side. And he was then director of the Versuchsanstalt für Wasserbau und Schiffbau, later professor at the Technische Universität. He was actually also my doctor father, so I know him very well. And I know the whole family very well, you know. But he also died a bit early, I think. He wasn't even in pension when he died, you know. But he could tell very interesting stories there, you know, at that time. And I was first a student. We made sometimes practicum in that test facility. And so we were a bit involved in these tests, you know, and how sensitive that was with the rudder action and so on. So there were lots of discussions all the time about these things, you know. And so I just wonder how you see the Russian development. Did they make many changes, or did they follow very much the Schertl-Sachsenburg way?
Well, this is it's a kind of a difficult question because, of course, a lot of Germans say the Russians have just taken the German development. But if you have a look at just to say, after the war, the Sachsenburg shipyard was in the Soviet zone, and they occupied this, and they gave the order that all engineers there have to write down all the knowledge about hydrofoils in a large document. This had been as real large folders. I mean, this is my camera is too small to show how much paper that was. And there are three of them in the world. One is now in the Hamburg Ship Museum, somewhere there. This was property of Volker Joost. Unfortunately, he gave it to this museum before I met him. So otherwise it would be mine now. But anyway, the Russians wanted to know everything about these hydrofoils. But if you have a look at the Russian hydrofoils, in fact, they are completely different. So the foil system, I mean, the basics are always the same, but the basics are much older than are the same basics as flying in the air, about a profile lifting in the water or in a what medium ever you take. But the foil system itself, it's for me so much different. I think they haven't took too much from that system. But if you look in later constructions, there was there had been some military hydrofoils as well as one or two commercial hydrofoils. They used a kind of this Shuttle-Sachsenberg surface piercing system, but only there are 2 or 3 types of boats. Not the most have these. I mean, the Raketa has a full submerged system with some assistant foils, and the later the Cometa or the Meteor, these foil systems are completely different. So, and if you look, there is the Rostislav Alexeyev had designed his hydrofoils also in the early 50s. That means maybe could take this information. On the other hand, I don't think he started from zero in the 50s. I think he also had his ideas earlier. I mean, there had been a lot of hydrofoil pioneers in the earlier days, so it's not completely something new what Sachsenberg and von Schertl did. I mean, there were some ideas in England in the wartime, and in France, and even in Germany there had been other designers or inventors, but not with that at the end with that success, maybe not with the financial background like von Schertl had in Sachsenberg. But to come to the point, I think they maybe later used some ideas of von Schertl and Supramar, but for me, if I look at the basic Russian hydrofoils, they are not a kind of a copy. They are in itself own development. But I must confess, I have not investigated the Russian development, just maybe because I don't speak Russian, and you maybe should go to the archives in Russia or other former Soviet Union countries to see what there is, if you find it. I have some books about, but yes, they're in Russian, so they have nice drawings, but you not find out what they mean.
Thomas, I might just chip in there. Of course, we were planning to have the Alexeyev Hydrofoil Design Bureau joining us, Sergei Korolev. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us at the last session because he had urgent business. So that was the reason why he couldn't join us last session. But the Alexeyev Design Bureau have what looks like a very nice website describing the history of Alexeyev Rostislav and Rostislav Alexeyev, I should say, and there isn't an English equivalent, but you can see by the photos and images on there that they've done quite a good chronology of his life and his development. So for anyone that's in the audience there, they should try and have a look at that site, and hopefully one day they have an English version of it as well. I will add to what Thomas said. There was, if you look through Jane's Surface Skimmer's old issues, there was certainly a Russian hydrofoil that looked to all intents and purposes like a PT50 design. the name escapes me at the moment. It seems to have only been built in very limited numbers, but a classic.
Strela.
Sorry?
Strela, S-T-R-E-L-A.
Exactly, yes.
I think you did right. I think
yes,
you did right.
If you not look close enough, you really think it's a PT50.
That's right. So there were those strong parallels, but as you said, Thomas, a lot of the Russian hydrofoils relied on this whole surface proximity effect. As the foil got to within about a chord length of the surface, that it lost lift, and so it was actually, whilst it was on on the face of it, a fully submerged foil design. It was actually naturally self-stabilizing. So there are some Russian papers that talk about how that whole effect is achieved and how they achieve foil-borne stability. So that did seem to be a different route that the Russians took with some classic river hydrofoils than Supramar took with the likes of the PT20 and the PT50 and the like. And of course, Supramar also developed the air stabilized rear foils on the PT 150 that you mentioned to me the other day, Thomas.
Yeah.
Do you want to make any comments about that? I know we talked about it yesterday. Otherwise, we'll slowly draw this session to a close.
It would be interesting to hear how that functions. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. Do you have seen the video already? You have seen how it looked like, the system?
No.
So maybe you should have a look later. I highly recommend to watch the whole 25-minute video.
I only know from the discussions in that early times, you know.
Yeah.
I know that was done, but I have never seen it by myself. Yeah.
But anyway, you can see there the close-up of the foil and how it looked in service. The idea was, or there were two different ideas. One is that have even on the commercial hydrofoil you have to sometimes to stabilize, and on the other hand, Supramar always try to get in the military market, and we all know for Navy use you need to have a full submerged foil because of stability to have a stable weapon platform, and so they made some trials with the full submerged foil prototype. And other than all others, usually all others use the flaps on the foils to not to I mean, you have to something that makes it stabilization virtually, but to really make the stabilization in the water, you have the most use flaps, or all use flaps. And Supramar used an airflow, which means you have very small holes in the foil, and there's air pressed through these holes, and depending on the waves, it's more or less air, which makes a difference in the lift. So you can always keep the foil on the same level in the water, and you don't have any moving parts in the water, which means you have less cost and whatever, less work in the maintenance of the foil. And they developed it for a Navy prototype. It was planned that Supramar maybe would these hydrofoils for the US Navy. And the US Navy paid that prototype. It's in the video. It's the prototype is called ST3A. It's based on a PT3. It's a relatively small Supramar boat, and it was equipped with a 1,000 horsepower gas turbine, so it has really a lot of power, and it worked very well. They also made some simulated rocket tests with that boat, and it really stands stable. Then they used it in a prototype PT50 made by Wuhrmann. It was the Dolphin, to use that on commercial hydrofoils too, but they just used it on the rear foil, and that worked also well. And they built that system into the PT 150. It still worked well, but the problem is on hydrofoil you have not such much power as in a military hydrofoil, because power means it costs money, it costs fuel, and in a commercial hydrofoil that matters. In a Navy hydrofoil, if you need more power, you get more power. If you need more money to, especially in the time of the Cold War, you get the money, it's not a problem. But for a commercial company to commercial hydrofoils, it does matter. And so it needed more power than expected because you can change the lift in both directions. You have to have a constant airflow a little bit. So you cannot only make the airflow higher, you need the possibility to reduce the airflow. So you have to have airflow on the foil at all times. And this reduces the lift, which means larger foils or more power. And in fact, this was the problem. So this was also one of the problems of the PD-150, that the boat was not fast enough for the service plant. And so the system is very simple. Just reduce the airflow. The lift will be higher. The system to manage the airflow was a little bit complicated. This was completely mechanical back then, in the 60s.
So, is the resistance of the foil itself, is that the same, or is it very strongly changing, the resistance now?
I must confess, I'm not a hydrodynamic specialist. The resistance should be the same, but there's just a lower amount of lift as you would change the profile. I mean, if you have flaps, you change the profile of the foil. In fact, as you do with an airplane when you're landing. And this just means the lift is lower. But as I said, it was a little bit complicated, but it worked. Later, Boeing came up with they had flaps on the jet foil, but they had a computer assisted stabilizing system. So this was much easier, but this was also 10 years later. I mean, if you look back in the mid 60s, if you had to have a computer on the boat, you make the boat double in size just to transport a computer, no passengers. But maybe you have a look on that short documentary. You see it really on there's a kind of a plan how it worked. And
Thomas, would you like me to try and show that? We can show that, but then we should move on to Gary's presentation, because I'm conscious that the people in the audience may well want to listen to both in a certain time. So,
yeah.
So should we maybe just show that briefly and then move on? Does that sound all right? I think I can move fairly far forward and see where it is.
It's I think in the last quarter of the presentation.
I think it's actually quite nice to see that whole concept, and you've got some fairly good. Tell me where it is. Everyone's screen should be shared now. Excuse me. Is it here somewhere? I'm just looking. No.
A little bit more to the end. Yes, we're coming closer.
You know it better than I do.
It's somewhere in the museum, a little bit more. Yes, just keeping forward. I think we just look about. I think we are on the right point, about the right point now. Just play it from here. This is the prototype. Yeah.
Later, Supramar used this boat as an experimental craft to test the Supramar Air Stabilization system. With this system, air is released through small holes in the foil in a controlled manner, in order to stabilize the full submerged foil. Moving parts on the foil are not necessary anymore. And now we can have a look on this one. This is the real stuff. This is the last surviving foil of a Supramar experimental craft. And I'm proud to say it belongs to my own collection. If you have a closer look, you can see the small holes in the foil. This is for the Supramar Air Stabilization system. We have just talked about that. And next to it, you see the 1000 horsepower gas turbine. I think now we want to see this in action. The so-called ST3A, based on a PT3, was a test boat to test the full submerged foil system for the US Navy. Tests were made here on the lake, and later the boat was also tested at sea. These are pictures taken on the French coast. Here on the lake they also tested how the boat reacts to simulated missile launches. You can see that the boat stays calm, not the cameraman. But the US Navy decided differently, and instead of Supramar, Boeing built the famous Navy hydrofoils.
Okay,
so,
I might leave it there, Thomas. So we all got a flavour of that air stabilisation system.
Yeah.
Thomas, thank you. Just even showing that last little bit of footage, you've got absolutely classic archival footage in your collection there. And, you know, one day I want to visit you over there and rifle through all your documentation. So, and I think, Gary, we'll go on a flight together and look through. So thank you again, Thomas, for your presentation. And certainly for everyone else, recommend that you watch Thomas's more complete 25-minute documentary.